Okay, so welcome everyone to our Iscia seminar series on games and play. And today I'm very excited to be able to introduce Lydia Amir to you. Lydia is shall we say, a long-term friend. And she is going to talk to us today more on the play side of games and play. And that will be her talk is about playing all the way to self-transformation. And that is fantastic. That's something that Lydia has been working on together with Jenna and I for a while. Well, not together with Jenna and I. Let me say, Jenna and I are helping contribute to a massive project that Lydia is developing on self-transformation and transformative philosophy. It's very exciting. But today, what she is going to explore in her lecture is this paradoxical relation between the earnestness, she says, of abiding self-transformation and this assumed levity of play. And she's going to be asking whether you can transform yourself through play and how can we account for the centrality of play to self-transformation? Um, so are these kind of really serious concepts, should we call them those, values, truth, ideals, diminished through play? Um, or is there some kind of friendlier approach to them? Okay, so all of these questions, philosophical questions related to playing all the way to self-transformation, is what we will hear from Lydia. Lydia is a professor at the philosophy department at Tufts University in the USA. And as I said, this massive handbook for transformative philosophy will now have a companion volume, which we are all very, very excited to hear about. And basically, I'm not going to enumerate all of Lydia's achievements because it's just enormous. But let's just say that Lydia is one of the humor gurus, a very big figure in uh, generating, I think, and constituting the field of humor studies. So we are super excited to have you here with us, Lydia, and I'm not going to take up any more time, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Such a wonderful introduction. I'm so glad you're in Belgium. I am in Paris, or nearby, so I feel a closeness. And thank you for mentioning the Handbook for Transformative Philosophy. It's completed, it's online, and we are soon going to have a hard cover copy this month, if I'm not mistaken. But I wanted to share with you first the good news that what you talked about, the Philosophy of Humor Handbook, more than 1,000 pages, is out. And yes, thank you. And the problem was not so much to get it out, although it took 7 years with the COVID and with Palgrave being acquired by Springer. And Palgrave wanted a big handbook, which they got. And Springer said, no, we do not publish these big handbooks. And then we had to wait for months of deliberation. And finally, this is out. The problem was how to bring it to Europe, because very humorously, this handbook arrived a few hours after I left Boston. Although I begged, I said I need it because there is a conference in the Sorbonne, which finished yesterday, in which I presented this handbook, and I had to have one copy at least to show those kind people. I don't know if Matthias Blondel is here. I see he was organizing that conference, and so he was very helpful, not only for the conference and for me personally, but for bringing this book, which arrived one day before the conference, for an enormous amount of money, that the secretary of the Department of Philosophy personally went and paid so that international handbook would arrive in France on time. All right. So today I am going to talk about the relationship between humor and maybe even play. If we take the word play, he has play. The when you drive, you use part of the car. You expect to have some play in it. That means some freedom, actually, and the very idea of transformation. So it is based mainly on my chapter in the Handbook for Transformative Philosophy for Springer, which is called very ambitiously humor, joy, and happiness, the transformative power of humor, joy, and happiness, because there is a connection, there is an acceleration between humor. Then you may ask, how does this transform to joy, to mirth, and maybe abiding cheerfulness? And then what's the relationship between joy and happiness? And how are these transformative at all? But it is also based, insofar as we talk of humor, about the penultimate chapter in this book, which talks about um, treating the self as if it were an other, or addressing the self, oneself as if an other, from Homo ridens, from the tradition of the laughing human being in philosophy, to Homo risibilis, to the shorter, but I think very powerful tradition, which I try not only to rekindle because there's not much of it, but actually to formulate it, the shorter tradition of the ridiculous human being, Homo risibilis, which I advance. And this is the moment to thank you for inviting me to South Africa in the past, and also for being part of this series. I think it's the second time. Until now, I've talked about humor. So I'm very grateful and very happy, excited, as says the American, to be part of this series one time again. All right. So at first sight, when we talk about transformation, people in philosophy, they're a little bit startled. Transformation means something very deep, very serious, especially when they ask, what do you mean by transformation? So I say, well, change. But, we change every moment, every day. So this is not quite what we mean by transformation, because we don't need philosophy, we don't need anything. We can just be born, and then by aging and dying and maybe living in between, we already transform. As the Stoic said very grimly, we begin dying the moment we are born. That means we are changing all the time. We are losing all the time. We think we are acquire, but we are changing. So obviously, this is not what we mean by transformation. We mean something that is a little bit more abiding than the kind of self changes that we undergo all the time. But we don't also mean this kind of very strict, maybe religious or ideological conversions in which you are transformed, sometimes against your will, sometimes by a kind of brainwashing, sometimes by a kind of powers that you don't know exactly what they are. You may think it's the grace of God, maybe the influence of peers. It's not very clear. It's interesting. William James tried to study those transformations, religious transformation, and sometimes in religious people, like Saint Augustine, for example, if you read the Confessions, or if you read other texts, or if you read about him, you see that those personalities usually have very strong poles inside them, very strong tensions, like the good and the bad, and then they battle between them. And finally, they align with one of that side and begin hating or rejecting or fighting the other side. So, for example, some religious converts like Augustine and maybe even Paul are of this kind of personalities. We are not talking about that when I say the earnestness or the seriousness of transformation, because in philosophy, we don't want anyone to be transformed just by someone's impact, or by, I don't know, the grace of the gods or the philosophers, or just by reading a text, or by entering a classroom. This will be absolutely horrifying. if we had a discipline that would transform people against their wills. So we still hope in philosophy, I think, for a kind of abiding self change, which I called transformation. That means that your character is altered, maybe not in one step, maybe incrementally with small changes. Finally, it becomes from a quantitative change, a kind of qualitative change. So it's a change of character, it's a change of outlook. There is a big question: does the character change the outlook? Or maybe because you have a new outlook, your character aligns with that. What's the relationship between the two? Is your outlook on the world just a product of your own character? Or maybe these are two different transformations. One may be lacking behind. Maybe first your outlook is transformed. You're being convinced, for example, by Stoic principles. You understand better the world you live in and who you are. And then the rest of your life is trying to fill the gap between that ideal self that you want to be, the Stoic sage, and the concrete or real self that you are actually for the moment, although you understood Stoicism. So in philosophy, we can talk about changes that occur between the ideal on one hand and the real on another. So conceptually, we may understand, and the question is effectually. So I understand Stoicism or Epicureanism or Spinozism, which is quite a fit in the case of Spinozism. I would like to live like Spinoza, but how do I make this conceptual understanding effective? And if I manage to make it effective, I have a kind of self change that I would call abiding, that it's also a serious matter because you are not exactly the same person and your view of the world is not the same. And you may reach, if you follow Spinoza, beatitude and peace of mind and liberty. So these are extremely important topics. And you do it by reason, by truth. These are these very heavy notions of which I'm talking about all the time. When we talk about philosophic transformation, we are aiming at truth and we are aiming to reach it through reason. Everything has to pass by our own understanding. We should agree, we should accept, we should follow the argument. So there is a margin of liberty. This is the difference that I talk about when I talk about religious transformation and philosophic transformation or religious conversions. Here, there is a kind of liberty that we agree to follow the truth where it might lead, even if it leads not necessarily to happiness, if it's a great change in our lives, if maybe our friends begin to think that we are in the wrong discipline and we are living a little bit differently than the way of other people live in society. Maybe not everybody agree that this is a good thing. We want actually to um, implement, if I take this idea that I proposed before, implement an ideal in our lives. Now, note, there are many ideals in philosophy. It began with flourishing. You have Socrates, you have Plato, you have Aristotle. Then it was followed by peace of mind or ataraxia. Flourishing was called eudaimonia. Um, then you have three schools, very potent schools at the same time that are created in Athens and continue in Roman times. These include the Epicureans, the Stoics, and the Pyrrhonists or the Pyrrhonians, a kind of skeptic schools that offered you also peace of mind. And this school continued for 800 years as a fashion till the end of the Roman Empire and still influenced early modern and modern Europe. And to this day, everybody knows what Stoic peace means, what an Epicurean more or less means, and maybe not what Pyrrhonism means, but what skepticism means. And then you have another philosophic ideal, which I may call, maybe I am the one who traced it down from Spinoza on, with Montaigne preparing the ground. I may call personal philosophic redemption. I see it, Montaigne preparing the ground, Spinoza offering it quite clearly, followed by Schopenhauer, followed by Nietzsche, despite the fact that many people do not see that, and followed by Joe Santayana, a Spanish American philosopher, also offered a kind of inner philosophic redemption or salvation. There are also minor attempts. You can see the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze as offering a kind of liberation, and other philosophers as well. The French philosopher Alain used to say that a person who was philosophizing in the right way, that means in view of their own salvation. So the very idea of philosophic salvation or redemption is an important one that I'm trying to trace in other writings of mine, and in that transformative philosophy and book as well, in the chapter of early modern and modern transformative philosophies. So we are talking about a transformation that will be induced, because I'm talking today about philosophy, but it can be induced, in other fields, by an experience, by exercising. I really don't know. I'm talking about philosophy. And I'm saying that you have some ideas. I just talked about flourishing, peace of mind, and then redemption here and now. After that, there was self-realization, the idea of the 19th century and 20th century a little bit, with various views. And then you have authenticity, which I think is the last philosophic idea that we can find in its various guises, as atheistic authenticity, as it's called, or uh, religious authenticity. I think this is the last philosophic idea that we have. Um, you can also mention a religious ideal, which is the Middle Ages, salvation. Without that, we cannot understand the history of ideals after the Middle Ages. And you can add a psychological ideal of therapy, which is what people have heard about when they hear about transformation or change, they think of therapy. But this is a philosophy talk, so we leave aside therapy and we leave aside salvation, the ideal of the Middle Ages, and we say that in philosophy, one way of having an abiding self change is choosing through your studies, through your reading, an ideal of philosophy that you find congenial to your temperament, that begins to be convincing for you, that you follow through, that you understand, that you pass through reason, through criticism, that you really think that they describe the truth, because otherwise there won't be any ethical benefits. It cannot be an as if thing. And then you may have a change of outlook. You may understand better where you live. Maybe not a change. Maybe you had no idea before. Maybe you were only confused. Where you live, what the world is, what is your own nature, if there is a kind of human nature, what is your relationship with others? What's the problem with the human condition? What's the diagnosis and what's the prescription? What should you do? How can you ethically live in order to achieve that ideal? Now, I just mentioned the list of ideas that maybe exist in philosophy, but of course, if you are a good skeptic, and there are various kinds of skeptics, you can also find problems with any one of the philosophies offered within those ideas, and you can create your own philosophy, which also will contain an ideal in the light of which you are going to try to live. So one way of transforming philosophy is having a more stable character in which you align with a certain view, a certain way of what a great human being would be. As Spinoza would say, imagine, a model of a human being before your eyes, and you try to advance through the many experiences and challenges of life in order to fit more this model or this ideal that you have chosen. The ideal might change during life. You might say, I was young, I thought this was a philosophy for me, I was mistaken, or there was a kind of tragedy. Schopenhauer would say to you that you would understand his philosophy either by reading it twice from beginning to end, and also beginning to end, not only end to beginning, or by a big, great tragedy, then you might understand. So there might happen many things in life that make you change what is called in American your philosophy. But once you have a philosophy, you have an idea of where you want to go, there might be a terrible tension between what you want to be and what you are. The entirety of Nietzsche, I think, can be understood only as the terrible description of that impotence that Nietzsche has and describes from Schopenhauer as an educator. And after that, he said, "This is about me." Nietzsche wanted to be a genius. He wanted to transform the world, beginning by transforming himself, and could not do it. So his entire philosophy, whatever, in my view, is valid in his philosophy and is not a projection, is about his attempt at self-transformation, self-change, abiding self-changes. But Nietzsche is it's a lot a description about the impotence that we have to change through, of course, free will, because for Nietzsche there is no free will. And in other theories of transformation, this is very interesting. Spinoza as well, there is no free will. And so I said that we should choose a philosophy, but Nietzsche said, I never had a choice, in becoming who he was. He doesn't self-realize in becoming whatever you want to be. Becoming who you are, this is also a version of self-transformation, or self-change, abiding self-change that Nietzsche introduces. That is also something that we should consider, not necessarily freely choosing, but becoming who you are, which for Aristotle is quite simple, maybe developing your potential. For Nietzsche, it was a tragedy because there were great impediment that you may call psychological impediment to becoming who he thought he was or wanted to be, but said who he was. All right. So enough about self-transformation. We understood I'm talking about philosophy. I'm talking about transforming one's character. I understand by transformation, self-change, but that is abiding, at least for a while, because of course you can continue to change. I'm not talking about necessarily conversion. I'm talking about sometimes gradual and incremental changes. And maybe that can continue for the entirety of your life. So I'm talking basically about what philosophy is. Philosophy for me is education, and as all education, in order to work, it's mainly self-education. So we educate ourselves. It doesn't matter if there is someone that encourages, someone who lends books, someone who is, a good teacher, someone who represents a kind of idea. It's self-education. And through that self-education, we try to become better, not necessarily morally, maybe even more stable character. For example, in Kierkegaard, the first move to make is to stabilize the moods. Also, when you read Rousseau, you see that the main problem is actually how to have a more stable character when you have this fluctuation that he used to have. So if we understood this, the variety of self-transformation that philosophy can offer, and what we understand by the words transformation and self-transformation, and if we accept to change the grounds now from philosophy to self-education, we can open the talk to the notion of play. So this first part was intended to show how these topics are very earnest, very serious. They involve sometimes lifestyles that are completely changed through philosophy or by self-educating yourself, something that you used to do before, you cannot anymore. Some people you used to see before, you won't anymore. some options that you're open to for you are not anymore. Other open up, and a new path sometimes is shown to you. But it's heavy a topic. It's your life. So we can look at it with levity and say it doesn't matter, it will finish anyway. But we like to live our lives as if it matters. Yes. Because we have a problem with futility and we really want to think that it matters. And somehow we have also the impression inside that it really matters for us to succeed or to, I don't know, to be happy or to live a good life. And it's very interesting because we don't know from where that pressure comes. We have a terrible fear of failure, and we really want to make it work. And frankly, this is not so easy. We don't have so much the means for it. So the very idea of transforming oneself, of having those self changes that would bring about better situation for you, through your character, through your outlook, etc., is a deep, earnest topic for us. Very, very serious, especially if you remember Nietzsche, if you're stuck in a situation in which you actually cannot. And he says there is no more miserable person that the one who has evaded his genius. So imagine a person that feels as if they have the capacity to do something and they cannot, they evade out of fear, they are the most miserable ones. And we know, all of us, something about that. I think that Jean-Paul Sartre made his entire career about the bad faith that we create in order to avoid to have this view of ourselves as the one who have evaded our genius. We generally put the fault around us, on people, on circumstances, etc. Okay, so enough about the seriousness. What about the play? It's a series on play. It should be playful. Okay, so when you look about what was said about play, and I'm not exhaustive here, but just before the talk, I remembered some of it. For example, Aristotle. Aristotle said that we learn, remember, I switched the ground to education and self-education. We learn through imitation. He says that when he talks about aesthetics and he wants to criticize Plato's view of aesthetics. Plato didn't like the idea that art imitates because it imitates not the idea, it imitates already a copy of the idea, and there are imitations that are useful and imitations that are needful, but not art. All right. For example, useful is to have a copy of a key to enter a room. Uh, uh, Needful would be the word itself, which is an imitation of the ideas, but art is not this and not that, and this is something that superfluous and also leading us to places where Plato doesn't want us to be. So he says that imitation is bad, not good at least. And Aristotle said imitation is good because we learn through imitation. But when you look for play in Aristotle, maybe there are other places, but I used to remember that he said that play is necessary for life because this is how we we take a break for the seriousness of things, which is quite interesting, quite different for Plato, who says that human things are not so serious, but we need to take them seriously. This is in the laws. So for Plato, human things are not so serious. For Aristotle, work is serious, human affairs are serious, but we need to take a break, and hence the play. But if we learn through imitation, what is the play that we see actually in animals? The play is animal is never just a break from work, from seriousness. And if we do not accept maybe a clear divide between us and animals, maybe the play in animals is not necessarily a break from seriousness, but is a kind of imitation. Imitation of what? Of what they would like to do, to behave as adults. Look at the plays of small dogs, small cats, they actually repeat. They imitate. It's a parody. It's a pastiche. You make the moves, but you make sure that they do not hurt, the other kitten you are playing with. But you actually imitate the movements that you would supposed to do later on. You are practicing it. Yes. So let me add a word that maybe has not been added. Imitating something, it's called a parody. Maybe a play is a kind of parody of seriousness. When you play a game like I don't know, I forgot how it's called, that game in which you have to buy Monopoly. You buy towns and houses and whatever. Playful as you may be, I am terrible at that, because then there is a side of my character. I'm not tolerant about that. So maybe it's a kind of rehearsal for the day you are going to be a business person, and how to do these kind of things. And it's supposed to be fun, but we are serious in games as well. Maybe we are rehearsing, we are imitating, we are certainly doing a kind of parody, a pastiche of what it would be to really buy houses and towns, and etc. So if all education in philosophy, or mainly education in philosophy, is self-education, and if we learn by imitation, as Aristotle said, and if I may say that the play of animals is not necessarily, as Aristotle say, that we relax from work, the play of animals can be seen as a kind of imitation, a kind of pastiche, a kind of parody of what seriousness would be. This would enable us to understand why we use play a lot when we educate children. We need to address serious things to have the young children repeat, imitate, parody, make a pastiche of what it would be later on. You see a lot of young children playing at house, the dolls and the kitchens and everything. They are rehearsing. They are, for us, it's funny because it's a kind of parody of pastiche, play, a play. It doesn't mean that it's not serious. They are rehearsing maybe the most serious thing that they would have to do later later on. So maybe play is already quite inserted in education and self-education, but we don't take it seriously because we think it's only in childhood. Children should play. What about adults? Are they going only to relax from hard work through play, as Aristotle said? No, if adults continue to be educated and educate themselves as necessarily they need, because the toughest things come with age, believe me. Not because I know something about that, because I remember my mother, but believe me, the toughest is yet to come. So you still need to learn, you still need to educate, you need to change. There are new challenges all the time. So if this is true, you need the play in the sense of rehearsing, pastiche, comedy of things, as we said, and the parody to be present all the time. But how do people play comedy as adults, or parody or pastiche? Actually, it has no place unless you go to the theater. Well, it has a place within you when you use humor. If you use humor internally, self-referential humor, even silence, when you say nothing to anyone, but you look at yourself internally through a gaze that we may call humorous, then you insert a kind of play within yourself. Why? If you remember the Middle Ages and this kind of outside plays where you add the iron and the alazan. This was even before the Middle Ages. The iron and the alazan were the two figures that the Greeks even knew before, that you could see in Italy, those kind of outside play in France with the guignol. There's always, the how do you call this couple? One is very slim and one is more heavy. Yes, well, this kind of couple, when one is always the butt of the joke of the other. So it may well be that we can have inside us that iron and alazon, the one that's running after us and the one that's flying away from us, because there's one part that wants us to be educated, to be better, to self-change, and the other part who doesn't want so much. So humor, divide your consciousness into one reflective part, which is actually what philosophy is, and a regular psychological, social part, which is what we all are. So maybe philosophic consciousness in itself enables that divide that we may call humorous. Humorous because then you have these two aspects of the self that you hold together in one eyesight. And so not necessarily these only two parts. You can have every desire, every emotion, even unspoken, even unnamed, come to consciousness in that way under the gaze of humor, because humor accepts conflicts without trying to resolve it. It cannot resolve it according to normal theories of conflict, except through, the incongruity being resolved on another level, but this is another topic. So humor is good as maintaining conflict, but easing the tension, maintaining conflict and easing the tension. So the plurilogue that we have inside, we are many inside, can be brought to consciousness because there is no criticism through humor, because humor may be an aesthetic gaze that freezes all that comes to consciousness and let them be, let them play. They don't have even to define themselves. So this kind of inner play that humor brings about when you use it internally can be a good model for bettering one's self-knowledge, which is a condition for self-improvement, self-change, self-transformation. It can be a good tool for deliberating because, from a cognitive point of view, humor does not enable you to act. Think about laughter. You're being tickled. You cannot do anything. Your muscles become weak. The same with humor. Everything freezes. So you can move the thing like in a chess play and on the table inside and just see your options and try various things playfully. And why is humor helpful for deliberation and for self-knowledge? Because humor itself is a play. Is it me or not me? That part that is, I don't know, egoistical or envious, or so slow in understanding something. So, okay, is it me or not me? Is it true or not true? Humor is this ambiguity. Humor is this ambivalence that we are. Ambiguity and ambivalence, unless we suffer from it terribly because we think we need to solve it, is play. When you have one emotion, one thought, there is no ambiguity, there is no ambivalence. If you can reconstruct ambivalence as a kind of play between things, it moves, there are options, and ambiguity as embedded in ourself. So our self is necessarily playful by being ambiguous. It doesn't have one definition, one way of being. So if you can further foster this playful part of you, you can see that it's actually conducing to the highest self-transformation possible. Not only it enhances self-knowledge, because you can stay here, my friend. I don't know if it's me or not. I don't know if you're true or not. This is like the playful approach to it enable everyone, everything inside you to be part of the conversation. If there is criticism and you have criticism inside, as Shaftesbury has said, criticism would work only if it's humorous. It needs to be playful. You have to play with ideas. Karl Popper said you have to let your ideas die instead of you. You know, this is a little bit more serious, but the playfulness with ideas enable you to understand better, to let some of them go, to change your own character if you want, to align yourself with part of yourself, and later on to live with conflict without resolving it. If you have various aspects of the situation, by this playful model that I'm offering, which is humor used for philosophic tools, you can have at the same time emotions that contradict each other or being contradicted by reason and by other things. You know, normal reason cannot hold contradiction. But the model of rationality that I'm offering through humor, because the play it affords, can indeed uh, 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 not only maintain contradiction, but even enhance a playful way of living and addressing things. And because life itself is ambiguous as well, it can only make your self-transformation more performative, more successful, more effective in life. Thank you very much.
Lydia, wow. Thank you. That was fantastic. So much to think about. I am actually going to open up the floor to questions. So just stick up your hand or do a reaction thing, and I will ask you to speak to your questions and comments and all of that as we go along. And I have 1,000 questions myself, but I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to ask Helen to jump in and start us off.
Hi. Can you hear me? All good?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Hi, Lydia. Um,
Hi.
I would, this is great. And I'm interested in you as in your philosophical counseling practice and how that sort of how it works when it's kind of an invitation to play and you're somebody to play with for somebody who's not feeling particularly playful, but sort of the softening that happens with that playfulness. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot to say in that connection, but if you could just say a little bit in of that in response, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You know, psychologists say that when a patient recovers the sense of humor, they are on the path of recovery. Very depressed people and even less depressed people, they told me, frankly, in reaction to my theory, not this, but another one, they said, but if I'm not going to take myself seriously, who would? So I know it sounds like a joke, but we are sometimes in a condition in which we have to stick to ourselves very seriously because we feel that otherwise we are going to sink. So we may say that when we feel better, we can play a little bit, but we may also begin the other way around. You know, every time I have a picture on the wall, I try to put it on the other side. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I do the reverse of what is considered normal immediately. So maybe by trying what is play, a little bit of freedom, album freedom, by trying to change the tragic from the comic, yes, the tragic outlook to see that it's actually an incongruity. Your desire to be a success was not accomplished. Welcome to the human condition. We are all failures, whatever you think we may be, yes? So by considering that as an incongruity between what you wanted and what you got, well, all desires are like that. The human condition is like that. Very nice to know that you have desires, but between this and reality, there's no relationship. Yes. So you may enjoy the desire, you may try to make it true, but to be depressed because of that, come on, you are better than that. So you need some elbow when you transmute the tragic to the comic, you have that initial capacity to play a little bit with things. So this is the shortest answer that I can give you, Ellen. But we can correspond by email and I can explain more. All right?
Excellent. I love that, making all these connections. I think that's sort of also part of playing. Um, Okay. While I wait for people to sort of respond and all of that, I just want to jump in there quickly and go back to Lydia, your list of philosophical ideas, which I think is fantastic, about flourishing. First of all, I wrote them down, and peace of mind, and then personal redemption, and then self-realization, and then you stopped at authenticity. Um, and I think that your theory and your work in general suggests very much another one. And that would be maybe, but maybe I'm now full of Simone de Beauvoir, I'm not sure, but maybe ambiguity. Because I think that's very much what your work has been all about. And I really do feel like that's potentially, I'm not sure, but potentially a spirit that is more contemporary than authenticity. And that might be another one, and fun one too.
Well, I accept the compliment. That's very nice. I just thought that I offered in with Homo risibilis that ambiguity was actually a means. It's true that I developed that a lot, but actually the ideal, when fully realized, it's shameful, but this joy, peace, it's the highest ideals of philosophy. Maybe it continues even Spinoza, philosophic redemption, personal philosophic redemption. It's actually contends for the highest philosophic possibilities, but without assumptions, without presuppositions, on a skeptical basis, on a humble basis, yes. And it can be a form, I don't know, it's not strict as authenticity, but it's a kind of realism, looking at reality the way it is,
Mm.
and how a psychiatrist told me years ago, yes, 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 when I explained philosophically, but why should you pay the price of it? I was paying the price of the world being the way it was. And I thought it was my job. And he, coming from psychiatry or psychology, was very pragmatic. Yes, 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 you're right. Why should you pay the price? Okay. So
Mm.
then I could understand that I could make a shift, seeing the world as it is, but still reaching other levels. But you're right that I developed the idea of ambiguity that you find in Simone de Beauvoir. I didn't know it about at that time. I know that Amélie Rorty wrote about ambiguity, but it's true, we do not coincide with ourselves, which Sartre said. But he was so serious. All
Mm.
these authentic philosophies, they are so serious. They forgot that the absurd is a category of the comic. What's going on with them? Only the, only the heterodox existentialism in France, like Georges Bataille before Lev Shestov, they were humorous. They were using laughter, but not the existentialists, even those who are called atheists, they have a seriousness. I recently wrote about that. Sartre inherited the seriousness of Augustine. It's actually an anxiety, it's actually, they are very suffering of a world without God, and they are so serious. They never thought
Mm.
they should maybe just enjoy it. And Camus insists that he has irony and humor, but no one finds it. But anyway, thank you for that.
Okay. So another quick question. But I mean, please don't let me go on. If you do have questions, just stick your hand up. But I want to know how, and this is a practical question, how do I adapt to aging by rehearsal, like a kitten would rehearse and play. Tell me how to play my way into aging, because I don't know what it's going to manifest in me in the future. So I don't know what to rehearse. So I don't know how to play this along, because I really do. I mean, I'm with you. You kind of keep losing capacities and all of that. And when I need to be humorous about this, and I need to know how. Any
Yeah.
advice?
So, yesterday I was in Paris and I took the time to go to the FNAC and to look at the philosophy books. And then I saw a book about the philosophy of aging, and I looked a little bit inside, and he said, life is a great adventure for an older person, just taking a step without falling. Yes. just being just
Okay.
being careful about the surrounding. My stay in Paris, I had to think, do I have my belongings with me? Do I have the key? Where is the money? It was like, you can take it as a terrible, terrible dream, and as a very fantastic adventure. A very friendly city has become for me, because I was jet lagged, like an adventure in the jungle, and I had to take care of me. So with a sense of humor, you need to be very compassionate to the fragility, and also humorous. It's you're supposed to give a talk, and you're afraid of falling, or you're afraid of
Mm.
babbling, or you're afraid of whatever. So this is one way. Another, which I play games with myself. I say, they said, I saw once in Holland, they prepared themselves for aging. I had a friend there. I asked her about that years ago. She said, we have an anthology of all the texts in philosophy about aging. And I said, okay, may I translate it?
Oh,
May I
wow.
see it? But she said, it's not very interesting. So I remember another book. There's a handbook to aging, the philosophy of aging by Palgrave. There was nothing there, nothing. I looked at it. They said maybe wisdom. They didn't know what to say. So I have my own opinion. I think that wisdom is actually because you lost your memory, and what you remember, you think that this is the essential, but not necessarily. Simply that because you know less. You know, so and I always thought that there might be pleasures that we don't still know about. When you have great pain and then it subsides and the Epicureans knew something about, there's immense pleasure. We think that pleasure is having a good meal and good sex and whatever, but having big pain subside, this might be the highest pleasure. Being
Great.
being terribly ill and having 1 year to live, you may be reborn and look at the world with new eyes. So I think you should keep your best self for old age, because there's a lot to learn and a lot to practice. So make sure
Okay.
you have it, okay?
All
And read
right.
your philosophy books. Look for a passage about aging. Write a book.
I'll write a book. All right.
Susan Neiman wrote a book on evil, wrote recently a book about aging. Philosophers begin to, and there is an association to be created. Maybe you can lead that. We need an association to know how to age better, now that we live longer. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Wonderful.
yeah,
Thanks, Lydia.
yeah.
Yeah. Alex. Alex, you're
Yeah, I'm
muted.
muted. No, no. Thank you. Sorry, Andrea. Thank you so much, Lydia. I mean, there's so many gleaming insights. I'm gonna need to listen to this talk again. But I really wanted to know if you could expand on a couple of those insights a little bit more, um, which is about, which I thought was a really stunning definition of humor as something that maintains conflict but releases tension.
Yeah.
And then allows more room and playfulness. And then the second is, I'm sure you've had this experience in your counseling practice, but what I think is a sort of undisclosed secret is how much laughter can happen in a counseling relationship.
You know what?
In a counseling relationship.
Counseling. I heard
Yes.
constant. Yeah.
Yeah, so in a counseling relationship. And if you could just offer reflections on those two things, I'd be very grateful.
Okay, the first was about humor. So humor has been defined in various ways, one of which is actually, I have it in my books. It's actually a compound. There is an emotional compound. There is a cognitive compound that's related to will, and there is a cognitive compound. In the cognitive compound, you have uh, association of different ideas or ill-jointed ideas, like the incongruity theory, yes? So in itself, humor would be capable of holding either opposition, incongruous ideas. If you go to the creativity aspects of humor, Kessler and de Bono more recently, you see that they take humor as the example of creativity. And it's all about being able to hold together ideas, maybe thoughts and emotions that do not go well together. But humor, because it's true and not true, it's me and not me, it's playful with that, is capable of doing that. So in itself, it enlarges your own self. When you do it with your life and with reality itself, it's not spontaneously funny. The problem with humorists and philosophers of humor, they study only what's spontaneously funny. This is, philosophically speaking, is less interesting. What's more interesting, I think, is to take humor and to make it into a philosophic tool, which I do. And this is a French philosopher that said, André Comte-Sponville, humor is the capacity, he defined it, to laugh about what is not funny. Okay, so if you take it seriously, not only playfully, you begin to see that there is a margin there. You talk about counseling. I used to have a radio program and I was interviewed, and then I thought that there are limits to my theory. And of course, losing a child, it's a terrible tragedy, and I would never thought of big tragedies as something that people would construe as comical. But then a woman called me and came to see me and said, I lost a child and I found your talk so refreshing and so helpful. And she insisting on learning the theory. I once had a person who came, a man, he said, I understand everything about what you say, but I don't understand how you transmute the tragic into the comical. And I had to think, and I thought, and I said, deepen the tragic, it will lead there, which I think is true. I think you find that. And he says, you're right. I always avoid the discussion with my wife and with everything. If you avoid, you're in the limbo. You'll never get to the comical. The comical is actually a survival tool. And unless you are played all your cards and you are with your back to the wall, it won't come out. But when it will, when you are in that situation, there's a way out when you played all the things, but you have to deepen the tragic. And the paradoxical thing, we don't want to get there because we don't know there's a way out of that labyrinth. But there is, and it's the comical and humor, which is a survival tool. Okay? So in the counseling session, there is as much laughter as the counselor is ready to bring. I am not imposing that. I have my own normal way of doing counseling about one question, few answers, without any humor. And a very serious person. This is why I had to develop these theories. Very heavy. So only when a person asks for explicitly that theory of Homo risibilis and transmuting the tragic into the comical do I accept to do that. Otherwise, I'm just a regular philosopher, which very interesting method in philosophical practice, but unrelated to humor or laughter. And we can correspond. I can send you text.
Lydia, thank you. Lydia, we've got just enough time to squeak in one more little question. And there's somebody in the audience called Ansel who sent me a question and said, it's a stupid question, I'm not going to ask her. And I think it's a great question. So Ansel, I'd love you to come and just maybe just speak to it.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. You're a very intimidating person, so I was kind of nervous to ask you a question.
No, I'm
Um,
not. Frankly, I'm not. I wish you would know me. Ask Andrea. I'm not intimidating. Am I?
Fantastic.
Well,
So I'm wondering if the project of self-transformation through play, when it's pursued earnestly and systematically, does it risk becoming its own form of seriousness?
Yeah, it's a very old question. Now that you asked me, said the project of changing through play. Now I remember what my philosophy PhD doctorate advisor told me. He came from physics. I said, how do you know where to put things, when you write an essay or a paper or this before the other? He said, you don't. You try. And I didn't like the answer. I was very serious, I didn't like. But actually, we do it all the time. It's only about trying. This is what you can do. Okay, so if you try very seriously, you are going to be very frustrated all the time. Trying means, remember Montaigne, essays, trials, trials. This is why he's talking about wisdom that will be gay and sociable, So you have to, like in my case, I accepted to publish drafts. All I can do is just try, because otherwise I would never write anything or publish anything. You try. And if you very seriously say, this is the best I can do, this is too much. There's a deadline. This is what I can do. This is what I want to do. This is what I would do. This is what I did for the moment. And that's it. So this is the way you don't make it too serious. These are only trial. But if you remember my PhD advisor, he wanted me to change very rapidly and very radically because he said life is short. Cannot wait too long. Okay. I needed a more gradual way. He said life is short. Okay, so between life is short and just try, that's all right. You did your best. Yes. Find your own pace and path to transform in a way that respects the things in you that resist that. I had things in me that resisted that, and till I read the Taoist text, the Taoist text that said, I was whipping, I was beating the lazy sheep, and it didn't help. And I realized I was whipping myself and it won't help. I am as rapid as the slowest in the entire family of Lydias. And some of us are very slow and they are very afraid and they are 5 years old forever. But we are a very happy family now that I accepted that we cannot run and advance unless, as every family knows, unless the 5 years old agrees to go on the plane and to give the talk. So I'm becoming very compassionate, very loving, very playful, very patient with myself.
fantastic, Lydia. That is a brilliant note to end on. We are unfortunately out of time, and we could listen to you all week. But I just want to say thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring. And we will put it on YouTube so everybody can go back to it and listen to it over and over, which will be wonderful. So thank you so much. It was great fun to have you and lovely to see you. And yeah, thank you.
Andrea, I'm waiting for the Association for Aging, the philosophy of aging. Really, if you should begin that would be great. We all need that.
Okay, I'm going to call it the playful something of aging.
Yeah.
Play of age.
Gracefully.
Graceful, the graceful play. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Graceful aging. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for having me again. It was wonderful to meet some of you that were new and maybe other people that are already here. Thank you for being such a great audience always. Thank you, Andrea.
You. All right.
Say hello to Jenny.
Oh, yes, I will. Yes, I hope she has not drowned and is not swimming in her swimming issues. But thank you all for joining us.
Okay.
And yes, everybody in GQ, keep safe, keep out of the rain, and we will see you all next week. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.